In the spring of 54 BC, when Caesar returned to Brittany, he found his naval forces significantly bolstered. He now had 28 warships and over 600 newly constructed transport ships, crafted from local timber, with sails and tackle sourced from Spain. Combined with the remaining vessels from the previous year's expedition, this fleet was large enough to transport 5 fully equipped legions and 2,000 cavalry across the English Channel. The tribes that had reneged on their promises and withheld hostages were soon to face the consequences of their defiance. The latest amphibious operation was composed of Caesar's seasoned Spanish legions, most notably the 10th, along with the 7th, 8th, and 9th legions, joined by the northern Italians of the 12th Legion. In total, a force of around 50,000 legionaries and auxiliaries gathered at their camps along the French coast before moving toward the embarkation point. This time, Caesar shifted the departure location a few miles up the coast from Boulogne to a place he referred to as Portus Aetius, which modern historians generally identify as Wissant. The new embarkation point reduced the channel crossing distance for the invasion force to an estimated 30 miles, a strategic adjustment by Caesar to improve the efficiency of the journey. By the time the invasion fleet set sail, it was already well into spring. The first ships of Caesar's large convoy raised anchor at sunset, aided by a light southerly breeze that carried them steadily up the French coast and out into the English Channel as night fell. However, by midnight, the wind had died down, and by dawn, the current had carried the leading ships far up the Kent coast, past the North Foreland and beyond the previous year's landing site. Caesar, intent on landing in a familiar location, had wisely equipped all his transport ships with oars. This decision now proved invaluable. The legionaries aboard willingly took to the oars, rowing the heavily laden vessels back down the coast towards what is now Deal. They were able to keep pace with the swift warships of the escort, which were manned by trained oarsmen. By midday, Caesar's fleet had arrived off the coast from which he had departed the previous fall. The shoreline appeared eerily deserted, with no signs of activity visible from the ships. However, the tribesmen were there, hiding on the surrounding hills. Since dawn, they had been watching the horizon as it filled with hundreds of sails and thousands of glinting oars. The year before, the Britons had encountered only about 80 Roman ships off their shores. Now, they were overwhelmed by the sight of 800 vessels. As the hours passed, the Strait of Dover grew darker with the mass of Roman ships. This would be, by far, the largest invasion fleet to ever reach Britain's shores. Even the Spanish Armada of 1588, with its 130 ships and 19,000 troops, would pale in comparison. The sheer size of Caesar's fleet so terrified the British tribal leaders that they chose to withdraw to higher ground, avoiding a direct confrontation. The landing proceeded unopposed on a long, sandy stretch of coastline between Deal and Sandwich, slightly north of the previous year's landing site. While the Roman forces disembarked, cavalry patrols were dispatched inland to scout the surrounding area. These patrols soon returned, bringing with them local tribespeople who had been caught off guard and were unable to flee when the Roman cavalry suddenly appeared in their fields. From these prisoners, Caesar learned that British warriors were gathering in significant numbers and discovered the locations of their assembly points. Throughout his military career, Julius Caesar often employed the tactic of marching in the early hours to catch his enemies by surprise. On this occasion, shortly after midnight, he left his least experienced legion, the 12th, along with 300 cavalry, to guard the newly established camp under the command of General Quintus Atrius. With his 4 veteran Spanish legions and 1,700 cavalry, Caesar set off under the cover of night. The Roman column advanced 12 miles in the darkness, and at dawn they discovered that the Britons had positioned their chariots and cavalry along the banks of the River Stour, near present-day Canterbury, ready to oppose their progress. Caught off guard by the Roman approach, the Britons quickly retreated to nearby higher ground. Their chariot drivers displayed remarkable skill, maneuvering their horses at full speed along the slopes. As the Roman legions advanced, the British chariots launched a swift attack, descending from the hill. However, Caesar had anticipated this move, and his cavalry swiftly intercepted the chariots, driving them back with ease. This effective defense neutralized the British assault before it could disrupt the Roman forces. The Britons retreated into a nearby forest, seeking refuge in an old stockade that had previously served as a fortification during intertribal conflicts. To fortify their position, they rolled massive logs in front of the gateways. As the Roman column approached, small groups of Britons emerged to engage in brief skirmishes before retreating back to the stockade. Caesar then selected one of his legions to assault the fortification. He chose the 7th Legion, which had disappointed him during the previous year's campaign. At that time, the legion had allowed itself to be encircled in a wheat field and had required Caesar's intervention to be rescued. Now, Caesar presented the 7th Legion with an opportunity to redeem itself in battle by leading the assault on the stockade. While the 8th, 9th, and 10th Legions remained in battle formation, observing the scene much like spectators at a sporting event, the 7th Legion was tasked with the operation. Forming the testudo, the 7th advanced under a hail of British stones and javelins. Shielded by their testudos, they spent several hours building earthen ramps against the walls of the stockade to facilitate an assault. Once the ramps were completed, the 7th surged up in disciplined formation and entered the stockade. The Britons, overwhelmed, fled in all directions, with the legionaries giving chase through the woods, cutting down any who resisted. Eventually, Caesar ordered the recall signal, as it was late in the day, and he needed to establish a fortified marching camp for the night. The 7th Legion, having sustained only a few injuries during the engagement, had successfully redeemed itself in Caesar's eyes, once again earning his favor. The following morning, Caesar left one legion, likely the 7th after their exertions the previous day, to defend the marching camp while he led the other 3 legions in search of the enemy. After several hours of marching, they spotted distant bands of British warriors. However, Caesar's advance was interrupted by dispatch riders who delivered an urgent message from General Quintus Atrius, who had remained at the beachhead camp. Atrius reported that a severe storm had struck the coast during the night, causing significant damage to the invasion fleet. Many ships had broken their moorings, colliding with one another or being driven ashore, resulting in considerable losses. Recognizing the strategic importance of securing his rear, Caesar immediately halted the march, turned his column around, and returned to the coast, collecting the 7th Legion from the marching camp, as they made their way back to assess and address the damage to the fleet. The following day on the beach, Caesar and his staff assessed the damage to the fleet. 40 transport ships were completely destroyed, while the remaining vessels were salvageable but required significant repairs, which would consume valuable time. Recognizing the urgency of the situation, Caesar prioritized efficiently addressing the issue. He instructed all skilled workers from the legions to focus on salvage and repair operations. Additionally, he dispatched an undamaged frigate back to France with orders for General Labienus to quickly construct new ships to replace those that had been lost. Repair efforts proceeded around the clock, with oil lamps illuminating the work sites during the night and repair teams working in shifts. Within 10 days, all the damaged vessels were repaired. Confident that the fleet was now secure, Caesar reassigned the 12th Legion to guard duty and marched out with the 10th Legion and the 3 other Spanish legions to resume operations against the Britons. During the pause in the Roman offensive, the British tribes expanded their alliance to the north of the River Thames. The Cassivellaunus tribe, located in Hertfordshire and Middlesex just north of modern London, was the most powerful tribe in southern England at the time. Traditionally engaged in conflict with tribes south of the Thames, the Cassivellaunus set aside these rivalries and joined the British Confederation. Their king, Cassivellaunus, was appointed as the commander-in-chief of all the tribal forces for the conflict with the Romans. Cassivellaunus devised a strategic plan to impede the Roman advance. He aimed to use a combination of infantry, cavalry, and chariots to harass the Romans and keep them south of the Thames for as long as possible. Meanwhile, he focused on assembling a large force of chariots north of the river. His intention was to surprise the Romans with this formidable chariot force if and when they managed to cross the Thames. When Caesar returned to the Stour River with 4 legions, his scouts reported that the forest stronghold, which the 7th Legion had captured 2 weeks earlier, was now reoccupied by a larger number of tribesmen. As the Roman column advanced, British cavalry and chariots attempted to engage them. However, Caesar's cavalry effectively intercepted these attacks and drove the British forces back into the hills and woods. Upon reaching the old marching camp used during their previous journey, Caesar decided to halt for the day and instructed the legions to fortify the camp's defenses. While the legionaries were occupied with their work, British cavalry and chariots launched a surprise attack on the men on picket duty in front of the camp from the nearby woods. Despite being heavily outnumbered, the picket soldiers, aware of the potential consequences for leaving their post, valiantly defended their position and put up a fierce fight. Recognizing the urgency of the situation, Caesar ordered the 2 guard cohorts on duty, the first cohorts of 2 legions, under the command of Tribune Quintus Durus, to support the picket line and sounded the 2 arms signal throughout the camp. The relief cohorts faced immediate difficulties as the British forces skillfully divided them by driving between their ranks. The British troops employed coordinated tactics, likely directed by King Cassivellaunus. Squadrons of cavalry were held in reserve behind the tree line, and when the frontline fighters grew weary or depleted their ammunition, they were replaced by fresh troops from the reserve. This rotation of forces kept the pressure on the Romans and prevented them from regrouping effectively. Despite the intense fighting, the arrival of additional Roman reinforcements from the camp eventually turned the tide. With their support, the Roman forces managed to push back the British attackers, who then retreated. The skirmish resulted in only a few casualties on both sides, but among the Roman losses was Tribune Quintus Durus, the young watch commander, who was killed during the engagement. The following day, just after noon, the men of 3 legions, having finished their standard lunch of bread, were led on a foraging mission by General Gaius Trebonius. While the column was moving away from the camp, British chariots and cavalry launched a sudden attack, pushing into the Roman ranks and nearly reaching the legion's standards. General Trebonius managed to quickly reorganize the legionaries and ordered a charge. The Roman cavalry also joined the fray, catching the British charioteers off guard. The Romans overwhelmed several chariots, and the remaining British forces retreated to the hills. The decisive action had a significant psychological impact on the Britons. Witnessing the Roman heavy infantry charge and decisively defeat the chariots, previously thought to be an invincible force, demoralized the British. Many Britons returned to their farms, and organized resistance against the Romans began to weaken. Caesar then led 4 legions to the Thames, advancing along its southern bank until he identified a suitable location to ford the river. The cavalry crossed first, splashing through the water, while the infantry followed, wading through at times up to their necks. Upon reaching the opposite bank, the Roman forces quickly coordinated their efforts and successfully dispersed the warriors from Cassivellaunus's tribe, who had been stationed to guard that section of the riverbank. The legions crossed the Thames without further complications. As Caesar advanced north, he was guided by prisoners who provided information about the location of King Cassivellaunus' stronghold. Meanwhile, Cassivellaunus, having assembled a force of 4,000 chariots north of the river, 2 chariots for every Roman cavalryman, shadowed Caesar's advancing column. Caesar, accustomed to sending his cavalry on search and destroy missions while the infantry moved forward, faced a new challenge. Whenever the Roman cavalry ventured too far from the main column, large numbers of British chariots emerged from the trees and attacked the isolated cavalry units. This overwhelming assault, likened to swarms of locusts, made it difficult for the Romans to maintain their standard tactics. Ultimately, Caesar was forced to keep his cavalry close to the infantry to avoid being overrun by the superior number of chariots. During the march, envoys from the Trinovantes tribe, traditional adversaries of King Cassivellaunus, approached Caesar seeking protection against him. Caesar agreed to provide the requested protection, and as a result, 5 other tribes also came forward to surrender to him. Caesar's forces then reached Cassivellaunus' stronghold, which was located in a densely wooded area and heavily fortified with an earth wall and trench. This stronghold is believed to have been situated at Weathamstead, approximately 5 miles north of where Cassivellaunus' son and successor would later establish the settlement known to the Romans as Verulamium, which would eventually evolve into the modern city of St. Albans. As Caesar's forces approached the heavily fortified stronghold of Cassivellaunus, they found it brimming with warriors and cattle. Without delay, Caesar ordered his legions into action. The Roman soldiers, disciplined and resolute, launched a coordinated assault on the stronghold from 2 different directions. The attack was swift and ferocious. Roman soldiers advanced with precision, their shields interlocked and their weapons ready. The defenders, taken aback by the intensity of the assault, struggled to maintain their positions. The relentless pressure from both sides soon overwhelmed the defenders, who were forced to retreat in panic. In their desperate flight, the defenders attempted to escape over a 3rd wall. However, their retreat was marked by chaos and fear as they fled from the advancing Romans. The stronghold, once a bastion of resistance, fell into disarray as its defenders scrambled to escape. The sight of their comrades fleeing and the relentless advance of the Roman legions drove the remaining defenders to abandon their stronghold entirely. Caesar's troops, having successfully breached the defenses, secured the stronghold and claimed a decisive victory. While the main Roman army was engaged in capturing Cassivellaunus' stronghold, 4 tribes from Kent took the opportunity to attack the Roman supply base on the coast. General Quintus Atrius, who was responsible for the rear echelon operations, responded swiftly by dispatching cohorts from the 12th Legion to confront the British attackers. The 12th Legion, known for its discipline and effectiveness, encountered the British forces, who were poorly organized and led. The Roman troops charged decisively, overwhelming the local fighters and routing them with minimal losses on the Roman side. During the skirmish, several British tribesmen were killed and numerous others, including a chieftain, were captured and taken prisoner. The quick and effective response by the 12th Legion prevented significant damage to the Roman supply base and secured the area. Upon learning of the defeat of his allies on the coast and being deprived of his stronghold, King Cassivellaunus recognized the inevitability of his situation and sent envoys to Caesar to negotiate surrender terms. Caesar agreed to terms of peace which required Cassivellaunus to provide hostages as a guarantee of his compliance. Additionally, the king was obligated to make an annual payment to Rome and commit to not interfering with the Trinovantes people. This agreement marked the end of hostilities and established the terms for peace between the Romans and Cassivellaunus. Once the hostages were handed over, Caesar withdrew his forces to the coast. It appears that he never intended to establish a permanent Roman presence in Britain. Instead, similar to his approach in Gaul, Caesar aimed to forge alliances with the local tribes rather than making them subjects. He preferred not to commit his troops to long-term garrisons, understanding that the key to his legion's success lay in their mobility. By maintaining this flexibility, Caesar ensured that his forces could remain dynamic and effective, adapting to changing circumstances and opportunities. The damaged ships had been fully repaired, but due to a large number of prisoners who needed to be transported across the channel for sale into slavery, and the repeated delays caused by adverse winds preventing 60 new transports built in France by General Labienus from setting sail, Caesar decided to evacuate his troops in 2 separate waves. He himself was part of the second wave, which departed as the autumnal equinox approached. After several days of calm weather, Caesar arranged for his remaining troops to board the ships that had returned to collect them. In the late evening, the vessels set sail from the Kent shore with the outgoing tide. In keeping with their usual practice, the legions left behind their camp in flames, ensuring that it would be of no use to the Britons. As the ships carrying Caesar and his men sailed away, the flames consuming their former camp would have cast an eerie glow over the Kent coast. The men of the 10th Legion, gazing back at the orange light, might have felt a sense of finality, knowing they might never return to Britain. Caesar had accomplished his objectives with the Britons. According to Plutarch, before this campaign, many Greek and Roman historians had even doubted the existence of Britain. Caesar's campaign had not only proven its existence, but also reshaped historical understanding. However, from Caesar's perspective, the campaign was not a significant achievement. He considered Britain to hold little value for Rome and felt that it offered nothing of substantial benefit to the Republic. The return journey was smooth and efficient, with the convoy arriving in France by dawn. Both waves of the fleet reached the Pas de Calais without losing a single ship. Upon landing, the 10th Legion and its associated legions were stationed in various camps across France and Belgium, where they anticipated a peaceful winter.